Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to this meeting of Children and Families Overview and Scrutiny. As usual, this meeting is being broadcast live via the County Council's website, and it will also be available for viewing after the meeting. Please note that some officers who are presenting reports will be joining the meeting virtually. Can I please ask that all members and officers have their microphone on mute until they wish or are invited to speak. Can I now ask members to introduce themselves? I have received apologies from Mr. Frisbee, Canon Carolyn Lewis and Neil Lockyer. There are no substitutes today. Mr. Smith.
Good afternoon, I'm Craig Smith, I'm the member for Colville North.
Mr. Hills.
Afternoon everyone, Ross Hills, member for Mallory.
Hi, member for Rossley Mount Sorham.
Thank you. Mr. Welsh.
Good afternoon. I'm a member for Laby and Glenparva Division.
Thank you. Mrs. Newton.
Hello, I'm Betty Newton from Loughborough North. I represent Loughborough North.
And we also have Mr. Robert Martin here.
Hello there, I'm Parent Governor Representative.
Thank you. And I'm Hilary Fryer. I cover Quorn and Barrow, and I'm also opposite the chair of this meeting. So item 1 are the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of November. I propose that the minutes of the meeting held on the 2nd of November are taken as read, confirmed and signed. Is everyone in agreement? Agreed. Thank you. Item 2, question time. I have not received any questions from members of the public.
Just a quick one. Did Sue Whitting send a question in? Oh, she sent something to me. They said she sent a question. Don't know what it was, but obviously not then. Thank you.
Thank you. Item 3, questions asked by members under Standing Order 7.3 and 7.5. I have not received any questions from members. Item 4, I have not received any notification of urgent items that should be taken. Item 5, does any member have any interest that they wish to declare? No? Thank you. Declarations of the party whip in accordance with the Review and Scrutiny Procedure Rule 16. I have no declaration of party whip. Does anybody else? No. Item 7, presentation of petitions under Standing Order 36. There are no petitions. We will now move on to the main agenda items. As with all the following items, can I ask members to allow officers to present their full report before asking questions? Thank you. The first item, item 8 on the agenda, is the medium-term financial strategy 2022-23 to 2025-26. Members should have received a copy of the process which suggested for dealing with the budget proposals. We will discuss each section in turn, and there will then be an opportunity for members to ask questions on that particular area of the report. Now, I believe you've all been given a copy. Thank you. Jane Moore, the Director of Children and Family Services, will present the report. Also attending is Sarah Bricknell, sorry, I apologise, from Corporate Resources, who is here to assist in answering questions. I will invite the Director to briefly introduce the report before we scrutinise the proposals as the process is set out on the paper which has been circulated. So I'll hand over to Jane Moore.
Thank you, Chair. So the paper you have in front of you is the proposed 22 to 23, 22, 23 to 25, 26 MTFS as it relates to children and family services. So if I can take you to the top of page 14 and the section entitled Service Transformation. So as members will be aware, the demand for children and family services does continue to increase, with a growth of 25 million projected as a requirement to meet our needs before intervention, arising mainly from demographic growth as well as an increased need for social care. And obviously the pandemic has also provided additional challenges. So in response to these pressures, we've embarked on a fundamental transformation programme over the last year, working with consultants, Newton Europe and corporate colleagues on the Defining Children and Family Services for the Future programme, and also through other partnerships like the Children's Innovation Partnership with Barnardo's. So there are 4 main programmes of work that we are now currently working on across the department. That's the High Needs Development Plan, our Defining Children and Family Services for the Future programme, our Children Innovation Partnership and our Departmental Efficiencies programme. In terms of the proposed revenue budget, in paragraph 10, the table summarises the proposed 22-23 revenue budget and also the provisional budgets for the next 4 years. And you can see in paragraph 12, the total gross proposed budget for 22-23 is 703 million, which includes 482 million of the dedicated schools grant. And the proposed net budget for the children's department totals 90 million. And you can see the breakdown of the spend of that 90 million in the table included in paragraph 12. I'll pause there, Chair, just to see if there are any questions to pick up on that very first section.
Mr. Walsh, and then followed by Mrs. Newton.
Thank you, Chair. I'm certain I know the answer, but the children in care budget is the highest one. What sort of proportions does that break down into of the different costs?
Yeah, so the majority of costs are around our placement costs. So you can see there that the total budget is 48 billion. The greatest proportion of that is our placement costs. And obviously there is a proportion also for staffing. I'll just hand over to Sarah, who's also on the call, just to see if she can give a greater breakdown for you, Mr. Walsh. Sarah, you're muted.
Thank you. Underlying this, we have like a breakdown of budgets which shows how many children and costs are in external residential care, fostering, internal, external, kinship, and all the different kinds of placements. And we track that both in terms of the number of children in care, the total costs, and the average unit costs of those. I can certainly provide that for you. If you give me a minute, I can scramble around behind the scenes and sort of give you a breakdown if you want to move on to the next question.
Is that all right, Mr. Walsh, or would you like it circulated to us all afterwards?
That might.
Thank you. Mrs. Newton.
Thank you very much. I suppose my question to some extent is a bit similar, because if we look at the growth over the next 4 years, it's really not just about demand, but it's the complexity of the need and the increase for more prevention work. My question really is around whether or not we are able to meet this demand, because I think the strain on the services must be very high at the moment. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'll come on to growth in a moment, just to kind of outline what the growth assumptions are based on. But in answer to your question around meeting demand, I think there's 2 things really. One is that there are a number of statutory requirements that we as a department have. So part of our growth projection is projecting that increase in demand and therefore the money that we will need in order to fund that. And those are predominantly around our statutory duties, and particularly relating to our children in care, but across our entire kind of social work areas. But you'll see later in the report we are looking at other areas where we can either stem demand or kind of reduce demand, or consider other areas that we might need to look at.
Follow on from that, just a part of the question, because it did say significant growth in demand across the East Midlands, and I just wonder what sort of challenges, because if there's increased growth in demand, there'll be increased demand for services of social workers, and I just wonder whether or not that will have an impact on what we do here in Leicestershire. Thank you.
Sorry, were you referring to the impact of the increase in demand and therefore our ability to get staff to meet the demand? Yeah, absolutely. So you'll see that what we've projected into our demand is an increase in the requirement for, an increase in our need for more social workers. As we've reported previously to this committee, nationally, it's a challenge to recruit and retain social workers for various different reasons. We've done a whole raft of work separately from the work around growth to look at how we might better attract people to come and work for Leicestershire, and indeed how we might ensure that our social workers stay working for us. So it is a national challenge. Part of the work that we're looking at through our work with New and Europe colleagues is how we can most effectively utilise our staff, and equally make sure that we can retain as well. So you're absolutely right, it's both a local, regional and national issue around the capacity.
Thank you. I see no further questions on that section. Would you like to move on, Jane?
Thank you. So moving on to growth and starting at paragraph 16, we've projected over the next 4 years that the growth requirement for children and family services totals 25.1 million. And as I've explained, the majority of this growth relates to our continued increase in demand, but also the complexity of needs of those children for which we are delivering a service to. And that's culminating in both increased placement costs in terms of numbers, but also in terms of our unit costs, but also our increased need for more social workers as well. So just moving on to each of the demand areas, G1 social care placements should read 2.265 million in 22-23, rising to 19.25 million in 25-26. And you can see that this growth has been projected based on the number of children rising who expected to be in care rising over the next 4 years, and also the types of placements that we're expecting to need over the next 4 years. So this assumed growth in social care placements does assume a 5% increase as a result of the work that we are undertaking through our Defining Children and Family Services for the Futures programme. Without this work, the growth would have looked more like 7%. And also we've noted at the top of page 17 that the impact of the average unit prices for placements is also seeing an increase in recent years, looking at almost 35% increase in the overall average cost. And again, that's impacting on our growth requirements for the future as well. The next line of growth is around our frontline social care staff costs, and this is as a result of increased caseloads. So we are investing and need to invest in additional frontline social care staff, and this is about ensuring that they have the appropriate caseload capacity to support our statutory duties to deliver a service to both children in need, those children on child protection register, and also our children in care. And also the work linked to the increase in social care staff is also aligned to our placement growth. So as our numbers of placements grow, that also does the requirement for us to have more social workers. We've also detailed the historic need we've had to use agency staff in order to maintain those manageable caseloads that I talked about, particularly across our social work staff. And these obviously sit alongside our recruitment and retention strategies, and we've updated our plans to attempt to reduce the reliance on our social work staff, agency staff, sorry. We have had some positive impact and progress towards recruiting and training new social workers, but with the pandemic and also the ongoing need for more staff, this has impacted somewhat on our use of agency, and therefore they remain at a relatively steady rate, and this has been built into our growth assumptions. The next two areas of growth are remain unchanged. So that's the growth for social care staff market premia and our unaccompanied asylum seekers. That remains unchanged from the previous MTFS. So again, Chair, I'll pause there for questions on growth.
Thank you very much. Do I have any questions? Mr. Hills.
Hi, thanks for that, Jane. My question is just around G2 and G3. You know, we're budgeting 5.6 million to employ more staff to reduce the reliance on agency work, but it doesn't sound like too much 80,000 in comparison for the market premia. If we're trying to get to kind of high-paid, high-skilled workforce, would it not be prudent to spend a bit more money on the market premia to retain the staff that we've got, and to prevent staff leaving to other kind of local areas that might pay more?
Yeah, so the investment around market premia is one of many initiatives that we're taking around the recruitment and retention. So whilst we know that a salary that compares well with our certainly regional colleagues is desirable, and we need, so that's hence the introduction of the market premia, there are a whole raft of other things that actually mean we are able to better keep our social work staff. So things like good training and development, good supervision, manageable caseloads. So the two, G2 and G3, are both part of our strategy around maintaining staff. So having enough staff, which means caseloads are low or manageable, and adding the market premia are one of a number of initiatives that we've got as part of our recruitment and retention strategy.
Thank you. Anybody else got any questions on this section? No? Fine. Right, we'll move on to the next session, which is the savings, Jane.
Thank you. So the full details of the proposed savings for the Children and Families Department are set out in Appendix B, and they total 3.77 million in 22-23, rising to 14.5 million over the period of the MTFS. The part of achieving that, included in that is also the savings that are required as part of the High Needs Development Plan, and those include cost reductions within that budget of 25.8 million over the period of the MTFS. So just a little bit more detail about each of the savings lines. The first one is our Defining Children and Family Services for the Future programme. As I've mentioned, we are working on that programme in collaboration with consultants Newton Europe. And the aims of the programme are around implementing change to future-proof the children and family services so that we are able to deliver the right interventions in the right way and at the right time in order to ensure that children and families achieve their best possible outcomes, but also making sure that we are financially sustainable going forwards as well. There are three pathway programmes as part of that work. So there's the work we're doing around pathways for children, there's the work we're doing around our residential provision, and the work we're doing around our children with disabilities as well. And obviously we've submitted regular supports both to Cabinet and this committee around the programme. The total annualised benefits of that programme are expected to be in excess of 13 million, and positive early indications are that the current financial year, the indications so far are positive around the programme, and that's been played out in the current financial year where we're seeing an underspend of 2 million against our budget. The second area of savings is our Children's Innovation Partnership. This is there are two components to this. The first is our assessment and resource team, and the second is the multifunctional properties that we're building for our children in care. The financial benefits of this are expected to materialise from reduced placement costs, so reduced unit costs essentially, and also reduced social worker response resource through our placements being made much more locally, and therefore less out of county placements for those children, but also reduced placement breakdown as well. The third strand is our department efficiencies savings, and to date we've identified around about £1 million through various strands of efficiencies across the department. And then you'll also see in paragraph 20 that we are exploring further savings across the department. So we're currently undertaking analysis, but also a strategic review of our functions to look for new opportunities to take forward in order to meet the savings set out in the MTFS. And we've detailed some of those options being considered in that paragraph. Again, Chair, I'll pause there before we move on to the remainder.
Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. I remember well as having to place children all over the country in incredibly expensive specialised settings. Is the profile of those placements changing now? Are we really bringing them more localised?
I'll hand over to Kelda Clare, who's our head of children in care in a moment, who will be able to give us a little bit more detail about our children. We are seeing a change in the types of placements. We have fewer children now placed a long way away, but we do have some children placed some distance from Leicestershire. Primarily that's because that placement can meet their needs, and therefore we've sourced that placement. What we are seeing is a challenge in securing placements, and certainly an increased cost of residential placements for our children. Some of that's about the complexity of children, needs that need meeting, and some of that is about kind of competition in the market. I'll just see if Kelda wants to add anything more, because she's our lead for children in care.
Hello, just to clarify, currently we have 57 young people that are in residential accommodation, and Jane is absolutely correct that we are seeing much more complex behaviours from our children. We've got really key pieces of work to step down when appropriate and look at the appropriateness of residential care for our children, but we are seeing quite an increase in the cost implications from provisions themselves and providers, with the complexity, but also their own staffing issues is driving that as well. So in terms of our ownership and our drive, we've got a real clear ownership of our children that are in residential care, and understand their needs, and we are working towards ensuring that no child remains in residential care where it doesn't meet their need, and we have really clear trajectory plans in terms of stepping children out of care. We are seeing an increase in younger children requiring residential care because of their complex needs, which is in response to the traumas that they've experienced within their early years.
Thank you, Kelda.
Mrs. Taylor.
Yeah, just to add to that, I think we've seen a real shift as well of working with our partners, whether that be the police or the health. We really are starting to see that partnership working a lot more now to support these children to try and avoid residential placements as much as we can. So we're really starting to see that now.
Thank you. Anybody else? Mrs. Newton.
Just ask a question relating to that. Well, relating to that in a sense, are we seeing much of an increase in foster caring?
Again, I'll hand over to Kelda. She'll be able to share some really positive news around foster caring for us as well.
So in terms of our foster caring, part of the defining work has been to increase our utilisation within our foster care. So absolutely, we are utilising in-house foster care provision more, and we're seeing that we are evidencing that we are utilising that. We have really bespoke campaigns which are looking at trying to increase our numbers of foster carers that will undertake teenage, because we have seen an increase in young people coming into our care when 15, 16. So trying to ensure that we are needs-led in our resource for them, and ensuring their needs are met. So in terms of an increase, we have seen a stability in our numbers of children in care coming in, but our utilisation is much more increased in terms of utilising in-house foster care.
Thank you very much. I see no. Oh, Mrs. Taylor.
I think we're trying to look at a lot more sort of nationally as well, a lot more about kingship carers. So we're starting to look at children's wider family to see if there's anyone within that group that would be able to look after their children if it's safe to do. So we are really starting to see the benefits of looking slightly wider than just going into foster care. So, you know, hopefully that will continue.
We come in here because my background with my research, I think we need to be really careful in that area as well, that we look at the age of those who are actually caring, that they're not young children themselves, and because there has been an increase in the number of young carers in society, and that's not good for their well-being and for their future either. Thank you.
Yeah, just to be really clear, when we're talking about kinship carers, we're talking about adult carers who would take responsibility for the essentially the care of children. You're right, we do have young children who care, but that's a very different system. They certainly don't care for children who are looked after or children in care.
Thank you. Would you like to now move on to the next section, Jane?
Yep, thank you, Chair. So I'll move on to talk about the Dedicated Schools Grant. So for 22-23, the Dedicated Schools Grant remains calculated in four separate blocks, and we've set out those 4 separate blocks in paragraph 21. So that consists of the schools block, and you'll see that there was a cash increase in the schools block of 3.9%. Our central services block, the high needs block, which did see a cash increase of 14%, and our early years block, and you can see that there was an increase in funding both for the hourly rate for 2-year-olds but also for 3-year-olds as well. So the total estimated DSG for 22-23 is about 605 million. In terms of the schools block, the DfE have further stated their intention to move to a hard national funding formula whereby budget allocations for all maintained schools and academies will be calculated by the DfE. And we've detailed in paragraphs 23 and 24 what this means, including the detail of the revenue costs of commissioned new school places in paragraph 25. Moving down to the school funding formula, members will note in paragraph 26 that whilst the minimum per pupil funding has increased, many Leicestershire schools remain on the funding floor despite that additional funding and may well experience a real terms decrease in their income. Moving on to paragraphs 29, you'll note in 29 and 30 that we've set out the detail of a proposed transfer between the blocks, so from the schools block to the high needs block, as part of our measures to alleviate pressure on the high needs block. This was submitted to the DfE for approval, but this hasn't been approved. So the transfer would have reduced the high needs deficit by 2.3 million, and we're currently considering next steps and stages for that. In terms of the high needs block, the high needs block of the dedicated schools grant totals 94.7 million. And as I said, we did see an increase of 14%. But you'll see from the table in paragraph 34 that whilst we have seen an increase in the dedicated schools grant, there is a significant funding gap between what we receive and what we need to pay out, both in terms of placements and some of the other high needs costs as well. And even after the savings programme that we've got in, there's still a 9 million gap next year, and it remains pretty stable throughout the rest of the MTFS in terms of a funding gap. But you can see from right at the bottom of that table that funding gap, whilst remaining steady, does have a significant impact on our cumulative deficit, which is projected to rise to 62 million by the end of the MTFS. So we have currently got a high needs plan, and I know we've presented the plan to members previously that sets out how we are both improving the SEND system as well as looking at how we can manage the financial envelope better. We are currently working with Newton Europe, who are looking at our financial plan to see whether there's anything else we can be doing. And once we've had that piece of work back, it will reflect any further savings opportunities and potential impact on that growth trajectory that I've just set out. Just to end on the high needs block, local authorities are now required to carry forward our DSG deficits to the following year. We can only contribute to the DSG with the approval of the Secretary of State, hence the cumulative deficit that we've set out. We've detailed information around the central services block in paragraph 38, and in 39 we've detailed the provisional settlement of 36.1 million for our early years block. The final allocation does get confirmed once we've submitted numbers, but so that won't be till June 2023. That national funding has increased by 160 million as part of the spending review, and we've set out those changes for 23, 24 and 24, 25. You can see there that there's an increase in the hourly rate paid for 2-year-olds and 3 and 4-year-olds. Leicestershire does remain on the funding floor, and we do continue to receive the lowest rate of funding for our early years children. And again, Chair, I'll pause there.
Thank you. Any questions on that comments? No? Fine. You're doing well, Jane.
Thank you, Chair. So finally, the capital programme. So the proposed Children and Family Services capital programme totals 94.1 million. The majority is expected to be external funded. So it results only on a call of 5 million to the LCC capital funding over the 4-year MTFS period. The main elements of the programme continue to focus on the delivery of additional places for children, both at primary and secondary, and also additional places that need delivering through the High Needs Development Plan. We've broken down the detail of each of the areas, so you can see there that there is around 62 million over the next 4 years for additional school places. We're investing 13.9 million in the SEND programme, which is around completing some of those developments set out in the High Needs Plan, and also the completion of the DFE funded school for pupils with social, emotional and mental health needs in the north of the county. Our residential design brief has a capital investment of 2.5 million. That was previously included in the MTFS and was around developing our assessment hub and also our multifunctional properties. The investment that we've detailed now is for the next phase of the programme, where we're looking at acquiring another 4 properties to create more residential capacity for our children. The total cost of that will be 1.9 million, with half of that being provided through a DFE grant that we were successful with, and the rest is being match funded by the County Council. So as you can see, the majority of the capital programme is likely to be funded through external grant, and we've given you a breakdown of that at paragraph 42. I'll stop there, Chair. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. As we looked at the deficit for the funding gap between placement costs and what is coming in, I'm just a little concerned with the lack of capital funding for SEND programme, when it's quite clear that the more local authority schools that we have, the considerable cost savings that local authority SEND schools give us compared to the independent special schools, which are obviously charging a lot more than the local authority schools. I'm just wondering why that we've got a 0 in both columns for 24-25 when the deficit is so huge and the cost saving is so clear.
Thank you. Yes, you're right. We know that by investing capital in our children with SEND, we're able to provide not only cheaper alternatives but better quality alternatives. The reason for the zeros is that we're still awaiting our allocation from the DFE for our capital funding. I think we had around about 2 million for us a couple of years ago, or certainly last year, and we're awaiting that allocation of capital funding. So at the moment what we've built in is the funding that we know about. Once we have the indication from DFE, we'll then be able to look at what we can manage to invest in order to then reduce that revenue position.
Any further questions? No. Well, very good. So we take that forward, and that will go forward to we've gone through it very thoroughly, I think, and nobody's got any more questions. So I'd like to thank Jane and the rest of the team very much for that part. So we'll now move on to item 9, which is a presentation and it's a development of family hubs in Leicestershire. And that's, again, we're going to Jane. And I think then there is Ellie Lowe, who's joining us to give the presentation. So Jane will introduce it. Thank you.
Yes, thank you, Chair. So we're really pleased to present to you today an outline of the Family Hubs model and also the process that we're going through in Leicestershire in order to adopt. So I'm going
Just before Ellie starts, Jane, will the presentation be then circulated to us all afterwards?
Yes, yes, we can do that. Yeah.
Thank you very much.
Hello, good afternoon. So I'm just going to take you through a quick presentation on family hubs. So starting with, sorry, I'm just having a slight technical issue. One moment. Apologies. So the concept of family hubs. Family hubs have been around for quite a number of years and began to be mentioned really in policy and in paper discussions around 2016, but have been around for considerably longer than that. They're a system-wide method of delivering services to children and families. So they're based on a concept very much of a one-stop shop, and it's for all families. It's a universal approach to families being able to access information, advice, services across a broad spectrum of issues and services that potentially they would need to be able to access. So family hubs are a mix of physical spaces, so buildings which families could attend to access services, but it's also about the virtual space in which family hubs could exist. So that includes things like websites, it includes outreach, it includes virtual delivery. So particularly post-COVID, a lot of our learning about delivering services to families in different ways. And as I said, it kind of covers a whole range of services. So things from education to mental health, to children's social care, health, physical health, mental health. It's just a very broad spectrum of services that families might need to access. If we were thinking about family hubs in Leicestershire, we would be able to deliver from our existing estate. So, for example, children and family wellbeing service buildings, libraries and schools. And those are the kinds of buildings that other local authorities have used. But as I've said, we've also got the County Council website that we could develop further and build on our existing delivery online. So one of the key things about family hubs is to promote better data sharing between agencies. So an ambition of family hubs is that we would be able to work with partner agencies to look at how we share data to help us recognise and identify vulnerability earlier in the lifetime of a problem for a family, but also to provide more seamless services where families have to tell their story only once. So within policy, as I've said, family hubs have been around for quite a while, but over the last year to 2 years, we've seen family hubs mentioned more and more in national policy. And that's right across the department. So it includes the Department of Health and Social Care, Department of Work and Pensions, the Department for Levelling Up Housing and Communities, and also Department for Education. And in October last year, in the spending review, there was an announcement of £82 million nationally to help promote and to increase the number of local authorities working within a family hubs framework. Family hubs are mentioned through some of our key and critical documents and policy documents that we're working to. So they're threaded throughout the Best Start for Life, the 1001 Critical Days. Family hubs and supporting families, the programme that was previously known as Troubled Families, are very much interwoven and seen as a benefit to the Supporting Families programme. The Early Help Systems Guide, which is one of the documents which helps to guide us in supporting families, talks a lot about family hubs and about developing a sense of community through family hubs. and maternity and early years services are really crucial in family hubs, and getting that best start for life and having maternity and early years provision connected through community-based services. Linking in Leicestershire, there's a clear link between the idea of family hubs and Leicestershire County Council strategic plan, the draft plan for 22 to 26, and in particular fitting under all children getting the best start in life due to that connection to the 1001 critical days, but also feed into great communities and keeping people safe and well. Within the Children and Family Service Departmental Plan, there's clear links under the 4 priorities that we have within that plan. So again, best start in life, helping children and families to build strength, resilience, confidence and capacity, helping children in Leicestershire to live in safe, stable environments, and helping every child to have access to good quality education. So in November last year, the Department for Education provided £40,000 to each of the local authorities in the East Midlands under the Build Back Better funding. And this money was in particular to develop within the local authorities the notion of family hubs and to look and see how they could be adopted by those local authorities. And so what we were tasked to do with that money was to think about impact assessment, to think about a feasibility study, and to request a political agreement to working in a family hubs model through Cabinet. And in February this year, I'll be presenting a paper for Cabinet to consider where we request that in Leicestershire we could adopt the family hubs model of working. If the report is approved by Cabinet, we would then seek to go ahead with our feasibility study, and that would include mapping of existing services to see how they could be realigned within the family hubs model. So there are some funding opportunities. As I've mentioned, there was an amount of 82 million identified in the October spending review. Just to say, it wouldn't be essential for us to have funding, because this is about realigning services and about how we deliver services together across a partnership. However, we could achieve that change and change of direction and the kind of realignment of services much faster if we did have access to some additional funds. The government already announced that £12 million from that amount would be given out as grant to local authorities for infrastructure costs. So that was looking at things like IT and websites. It wasn't about buildings or service delivery. And we did submit an application to that fund, which we hope to hear from by the end of this month. And that was for just under £1 million. But as yet, we don't have any detail on how the remaining 70 million will be allocated across local authorities. And just some other information, the Department for Education has also funded the Anna Freud Centre to be the national centre for family hubs. And that's really to help local authorities to work towards developing family hubs. It's operating under a regional model, and we have access to a regional advisor and an information tool that would support us to move in that direction towards providing hubs. And that's the end of the presentation.
Thank you very much, Ellie. Do I have any questions or comments? Mr. Walsh.
Thank you, Chair. Can I ask Ellie, what's the essential difference between what I would recognise as a family centre and a family hub? Is it just rewording of something that I would recognise, or is there a difference?
I believe there is a difference. So this is for families of children 0 to 19 or up to 25 where those children have SEND needs. It's also about universal access to services. So, for example, our current family wellbeing centres are for targeted families who have identified additional vulnerability, whereas this is about access to services for all families, and it's not just about buildings. So I mentioned, you know, part of this might be about creation of a website or extension of a website that enables families to see at a glance how they can access services and what services are available to them. And ultimately, we might be working towards a single point of access to children's services across health, education, social care, early help. So it's broader than buildings, it's for a larger age range, and it is universal access.
Thank you, Ellie.
Mrs. Taylor, and then
I think it's in the name, isn't it? A hub is something that you view as a physical place, but I think as Ellie's really clearly put there, this is not just about buildings, this is about a universal service to all families. And I think where our children and family wellbeing services now, there's still targeted people that attend that. So this is really good for us because we have so many families on the edge of needing statutory services, on the edge of that cusp of really needing just that little bit of support. So these family hubs are hopefully going to help signpost people, support people across social care, health, education, to prevent them reaching that crisis point where they do need statutory services. So for us, this is really about prevention, and I'm really keen that we push really hard with this and get our partners on board, health, education, to really be part of this so we can stop these families getting into crisis point and help them at the earliest opportunity that we can.
thank you. Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, a comment and then a question. The comment about data sharing, I think, is an absolutely excellent idea. As a parent that has told my story to 15 plus different professionals, it is really draining and it's very difficult. One example, recently, I got sent from the service to another service that they couldn't even provide that service. So all working together across the health, education and social is really vital, as I've experienced where I've been sent somewhere that doesn't even exist. Second one, would you commit to putting parents at the forefront of the engagement with the service? I think that the document's fantastic and the hubs are a great idea, but what I saw lacking in there was like engagement with parents on how this is going to work, and putting them at the forefront of the engagement with the service.
Yes, that would be absolutely central to our approach. So if we do have permission to go ahead with this work from Cabinet, that will be some of the earliest work that we want to do, proper engagement with communities, because this is also about finding community responses to community issues. So it would be a really, really key part of the work that we do. With the £40,000 that we've received via the regional Build Back Better fund, we do have some resource to get that work started with a bit of a bang early on, so that we can help families and families can help us to understand the best way to deliver services and to deliver this information to them. So that will be absolutely central to what we do.
Thank you for that, and that's really welcome, because every engagement I've had with Hurley Help, the questions that I've asked of them and the support I've requested has always been a no. So the extra funding would be fantastic.
Thank you. Are there any other questions or points that you'd like to raise? Thank you very much, Ellie. We now move on, if there's no more comments or questions, we move on to item 10, which is an update on inclusion in Leicestershire schools. And this will be Jane Moore and also Alison Bradley, the Head of Education, of Service for Education, Quality and Inclusion. So I'll hand back to Jane and then on to Alison.
Thank you, Chair. So yes, the report that you've got in front of you is setting out our work that we undertake in the department to support inclusion in schools, and also sets out the work that we're doing under the new strategic duty to promote the education of all children known to a social worker. So I'm going to hand over to Alison Bradley, who is our Head of Education, Quality and Inclusion, who will take us through the report. Thank you.
Hello all. Thank you, Jane. Jane has just opened up with the report is an overview of the inclusion service and those new duties, functions that we have to a strategic view of children known to a social worker. The last time we came with an update on this report was in January 2020, and it was more of a focus at that point on the Forgotten Children's Report and Children Missing Out on Education 2020. This report just gives a reminder of the duties that sit within the inclusion service and the wider functions linked into the inclusion service. That's children missing out on education, children with medical needs, elective home education, and the provision for those children who are at risk of or who have been permanently excluded. In paragraph 11, you'll note that it does give some contextual information for the number of children on the role of Leicestershire schools, which helps to contextualise further information in the document around data, etc. In paragraph 13 to 20, this gives more detail about the way in which the inclusion service reports on all aspects that for its operational functions. In paragraph 21, the report around children missing education shows that there's a marked increase in children missing education over the 3 years, which does include the period of the pandemic and also the restrictions and guidance that have placed upon that. You can see the data there for that paragraph 21 that pre-pandemic we had 250 children missing out on education, and then that has doubled in 2021 from the 2019-20 data to 880 that we have there. Moving further into the report, you can see in paragraph 24 for the exclusions that we do sit that we are low when compared to national and regional areas for exclusions, and in the period of the pandemic there was a reduction in the fixed term exclusions, though as we've returned back to less restrictions in the pandemic period in November 20, we have started to see an increase in permanent exclusions. In paragraph 27, the children with medical needs aspects on there, you can see that there is a significant rise in the past 2 years. Some of this is relating to mental health and anxiety due to the isolation of children and families during the pandemic. In paragraph 29, we can see that the offer for children with medical needs does form part of the tuition and support and link with schools, but we also are trialling the use and have purchased the use of the AV1 robots, which have received a lot of good evidence base about the opportunities that they bring for helping young people return through a virtual aspect into the school environment. In paragraph 32, you can see that we also have an update on the children missing out on education or those not in employment, education and training. In the September guarantee, those year 11s in education and those year 11s who we know are going to be going into education, employment and training, we are now in the third quintile, which is an improvement on previous years. In paragraph 35, we can see that there is the unknowns have there's been an increase in the overall unknowns, but then that is starting to fall. It is a trend that we do see during the autumn term where we haven't got all the information on where the young people are or decisions have not been made, and that starts to play out and reduce during the springtime period. On page 8 in paragraph 37, the elective home education data. We can see that there is a trend that is increased, and it's similar to the national picture that we've got around families choosing to have their young person educated through the elective home education offer. The trend, as I say, is similar to the national picture, but some of the reasons for the elective home education is a choice and is related to the impact of children and families making their decisions based on staying there due to the anxiety of returning into the school situation. In paragraph 40, you can see that we have presented with a breakdown of some of the reasons around why there are decisions made to electively home educate children and young people, but there isn't a clear kind of rationale as to the overall headline on that. In the final paragraphs, moving through, we can see that in page 10, children known to a social worker, we have given an update in there around what the proposals are for us as a local authority in response to the duty to look out for the priorities in a strategic manner for children known to a social worker. In this authority, compared to other authorities, we have elected for that to be part of the inclusion service manager's role, as many of the functions for young people known to a social worker, those data collections do come in and are acted upon in the inclusion service areas as detailed in paragraph 46. The inclusion service will fulfil the local authority's duties to ensure that the robust and appropriate processes are developed, implemented and monitored, and there will be performance reports that go through the appropriate governance arrangements for the local authority on safeguarding partners. Thank you.
Thank you very much. So I have Mrs. Newton, followed by Mr. Hadji-Nicolau, and then Mr. Martin.
Thank you.
And Mr. Smith.
I noted in the report it says that there are more families opting to educate children at home. My concern with this is the ability of parents to actually be able to meet the educational needs and be able to give a proper programme for children so that they can develop and go on further. What can we put in place to ensure that parents are able to do that, or parents have the right capacity and the right tools to do that job? I mean, I'm personally not keen on parents, unless there's exceptional circumstances, educating children at home. I think it should be left to the professionals, but it's what we can do to support so that children don't lose out and don't miss out if they want to go on to further education. Thank you.
Okay, so in response back to that, the inclusion service at the earliest point that we get indication that a family have elected to electively home educate, there is a discussion that takes place. So hopefully some of those worries and anxieties that you're initially articulating there are addressed. Some families may have chosen to electively home educate and they think the provision is coming from the local authority still. So there's clear messages around what that will look like, what the responsibilities will be, are had. So there's quite a robust process that takes place with families at the earliest opportunity and with schools as well to make sure that every opportunity around the decision making for the parents takes place. Once that feels like the decision is being made for the right reasons for that family, for the child, etc., the duties then of the local authority are quite limited actually in terms of being able to sort of follow up on that. So there is a requirement to follow up to check that processes are in place and where there are concerns being raised by other agencies that may or may not be involved in the family, then we would bring that through the appropriate processes for that to be picked up. We do have occasions where families choose to do this for a temporary period of time and then do return back into the system. So again, that is the processes that we have currently on that. And then the process that I've described at the end of this report, where we have children who are known to a social worker or may have been known to a social worker. Again, we've got much more kind of rigour in the system to be able to sort of make sure that the family have made the choice for the right reasons and also are supporting their child to the next stage within their educational career.
On that, I mean, I have real serious concerns about this because my research background was young carers, and I find that they were at home caring and not getting proper education, even though the parents would say, oh yes, we're educating them at home. Well, the parents are ill, they're not able to educate their children. So I really do have strong concerns about the loss of education, but it's also the loss of social interaction with their peer groups. And for me, I think that's quite important for young people. And so if we could do as much as possible just to stress the benefits of children being in school, not just for educational purposes, but also for that social interaction. Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I have three questions actually. When we go to page 37 at the bottom, there is a graph which I find difficult to understand. It is a number of children enrolled in Leicestershire schools. Now, when you go there, this is actually divided between primary and secondary. And there is significant discrepancy. It appears actually an average of 23% less children in secondary education compared to primary. Now, I was with the impression that actually children in this country should attend school between the age of approximately 5 to 16. So how do we, why there is so much discrepancy there between primary and secondary? This is my first question. Can I go? I have two more.
Yeah. Would you mind, Mr. Hutton-Niclow, if Jane comes back on that question?
Thank you, Chair. I can pick that up really quickly for you. This is the number of children on roll in Leicestershire schools. So you're absolutely
Lovely. I love that because actually this is relating actually to the second question I have, which is about the primary education. Looking at my own paths, when I went to Rothley Academy, 17% of the children were not from Rothley. Now, if you go to page 43, paragraph 40, one of the major reasons actually for the not attending school is actually anxiety, but the second one is attendance difficulties. Now, attendance difficulties is related actually to transport also. So if you have actually 17% of children in one primary school which are not from the same village, I wonder actually which are these numbers actually for other schools? Is there any table we have actually for the primary schools actually in Leicestershire where we know to give us an idea how many of the children are not from the catchment area? Now, and the final question of mine is when we go to the secondary education, again from my paths, when actually we go to the secondary education, children actually use the bus. They leave actually Rothley, for example, and they go to Rowling, which is in Corn, or they go to Loughborough, Delisle. Now, a few months ago, Arriva cut down the bus service. And ever since, actually, I have so many complaints by parents and the schools that actually children do not really attend the first hour or the first 2 hours because, you see, the buses are passing by and they are full. I have complained to the council several times. The answer is Arriva is a private company. Actually, they are owned by a German company, to my surprise. And I would like to know what can we put in place actually to resolve this aberration and this struggle for our children.
To come back on that, Jane, as I think that's tied up with another department, isn't it? As well. If you can, please.
Yes, if I pick up your first question first, if that's okay, in terms of the number of children who attend a primary school in their catchment area, I don't have the information to hand, but there are a couple of things really. One is that there is a great deal of parental choice within the system now, so parents can choose to apply for a school anywhere across the county. Obviously, the school admissions procedures don't kind of allow for that at times, so that the priorities given to those children who do live in catchment or do live closest to the school in which they attend. So there are some schools who have a greater proportion of children who attend their school who don't live in the catchment area. There are a number of reasons for that. Some of it could be that the population within the catchment is smaller. Some of it could be parental choice. There are a whole raft of reasons for it. What we aim to do is ensure that children can access their closest school, or if not, that they're supported to access another close by school in terms of primary age. So it differs across the county. particularly around those schools that are more popular, or those schools in areas with a kind of smaller catchment area as well. So it's not uncommon that there are a number of children from outside of catchment who attend schools, and particularly those schools that are seen to be delivering a better quality of education. So we know that's happening in parental choice. In relation to the school transport, I'm afraid I can't answer. The responsibility for school transport sits within another department, but what I can say apologies. So yes, it is the responsibility of a parent to get their child to school in the first premise, but I do know there are some issues and concerns around private bus companies, but obviously the local authority is responsible for providing transport for those parents or children who are eligible for school transport as a result of the distance they live from their catchment school.
Thank you. Move on to Mr. Martin.
Thank you, Chair. I've got quite a few points on this, sorry. Number 6, the Ofsted research study. The comment about that, just a point to raise. What I've got it up in front of me, and it's their main finding was the fact that it's not simply preferred choice, and the main reason is complex needs and special educational needs and medical needs. It's not, that isn't quite what I saw in the number 6 on there. The second point is the COVID-19 pandemic. Throughout the document, it states that the COVID-19 pandemic is the reason why there's an increase in need for the service. Just wondering if this was evidence-based or if there's any data that backs this up. The reason I ask that is because within these data streams, my own daughter's in them, and throughout regular reports we were told this is because of the pandemic, this was because of the pandemic, and it wasn't. It was because of unmet SEND needs. Unmet SEND needs is something that is pervasive throughout all of the independent documents, but not really included in this document. So I just want to comment on that and whether there's more to it from what the document says. SEND and the inclusion service is another thing that's not really mentioned within the document. And one of the key things that I'd like to raise is that how many of the people on the inclusion service have been declined by the Educational Health and Care Plan stream, and how many children get out of this inclusion service by having an EHCP. I only say that because my daughter got declined in the HCP, came under your service, and then she got out of your service by being given an EHCP. And that is really what I hear from most families I speak to regarding children with medical needs or the children out of education. The documents that you recommend at the bottom of the paper, most of them for home education state that it's because of unmet SEND needs. In your graph that you give as the reasons why children
Thank you. I'll and you might correct. I'll try and pick up all of those, but do come back if I don't manage to. Just the first one about the Ofsted study. I think we pulled out a number of a kind of number of things. I think we summarised it and probably did miss. I think what we have pulled out is that the increased evidence base that home education can be the last resort because relationships are broken down with schools, and I think that will include, exactly as you say, some of the stuff around unmet SEND needs as well. So we haven't kind of expanded and pulled out all of the details. The reference around COVID increase and impact is it probably is anecdotal, partly because of we're in the middle of the pandemic still. The inclusion service was developed not long before the pandemic. So what we know is that the pandemic or the impact of COVID COVID is having an impact on our children. It's having an impact on our children in terms of their ability to engage with school, around their mental health, but also we know it's had an impact on the delivery of our SEND provision for children as well, because either children haven't been in school or indeed we've not been able to deliver their full packages, and that we are concerned about. The points around the SEND and inclusion service, we are working at the moment around making sure that children's needs are met at the best possible level. So an education, health and care plan isn't the only means to get support for children, I think, as you've kind of articulated. So it isn't about declining EHCPs. The inclusion service is there to provide support outside of EHCPs or indeed alongside EHCPs to make sure that we're meeting children's needs at the best possible level. Now, you're right, it could well be that once that provision's provided, all that support's provided, actually there is a need for an education, health and care plan identified, and as you've stated, that does happen. Equally, it could well be that as a result of various bits of support, the needs change within an education, health and care plan, or indeed those needs aren't still there. So I don't have the numbers off the top of my head, but we are working at the moment around making sure that we can meet children's needs with SEND at the earliest possible opportunity, and that the education, health and care plan doesn't need to be the vehicle to get that support. We ought to be able to support children at a lower level. And then the last bit, you're right, the documents do set out that the choice for home education is around unmet need. What we've detailed is the reasons that parents give us for their home education. So they might not match. So it's not that we've ignored that report. What we've set out in our report is the reasons that are set out for parents who move their children to home education. So I think that's covered all your questions.
Yeah, thank you. I think when I read throughout the document, unmet SEND needs just wasn't there, and all of the research that I've done and all of the research that is documented by yourselves at the bottom glaringly state that unmet SEND need is the issue. I completely agree with you with the EHCP. There are other options, but it would be interesting to understand how much the inclusion service is dictated by giving EHCPs or not. And I think I'll put in a freedom of information request for that them numbers, because I think that's, I think that's really important, because the inclusion service is there for children whilst they're not having an education. And the offer that my daughter got was 2 hours a week, which is not a full-time education. So I think the less we use the inclusion services and the more we give children the access to mainstream or specialist education, the better it is, I suppose. But thank you for your response.
Chair, if I may just add to that, and apologies, I wasn't clear around the inclusion service. The inclusion service isn't set up to provide an alternative education. The inclusion service is to support our children to be successful in whatever education setting can meet their needs. So we are absolutely committed to making sure that we can meet need in mainstream school, and the inclusion service is there to support children to kind of be successful or have their outcomes met in mainstream. So we do have data. We have readily available data around the number of plans that come in. We have data around kind of all sorts of things around the journey of the child, which we can share. I think what I would want to end by saying is that this report, we haven't particularly pulled out unmet SEND needs. I think or indeed their school.
Sorry, Jane, I was just losing the sound a little bit there. I think it was. I think it is important. I was going to respond back and say that the inclusion service in paragraphs 13 through to 20 are the ones where I wanted to sort of reinforce what the functions are of the inclusion service. So apologies if there is a misunderstanding regarding the crossover to the SEND services as well.
Thank you very much. Mr. Smith.
Thank you, Chair. I'll try and be brief before the microphone gremlins kick in. Yeah, I share Mrs. Newton's concerns about the electively home educated children and the concerning rise that we're currently seeing. As a parent of a child of school age, I think I can sympathise with a lot of parents that were forcibly elected into home education for the last couple of years. And it still brings back my memories of trying to remember trigonometry after a 30-year break. luckily, my child excelled in the home situation. He was very good, and he really did enjoy that period. But a lot of children did not excel, and that's made no mistake about this, particularly younger children. You know, they missed out on some key fundamental building blocks that only a school environment can offer. And that does concern me, that more and more parents are electively home educating the children, because kids need to be with other kids. That's a fact. It's how they learn from one another. But also from a safeguarding point of view as well, where are we with the safeguarding when obviously we're only seeing them once a year? And even then, I believe colleagues have told me that that's not necessarily something that we have got the right to do. They can elect to say no. So yeah, I'm really interested to see future reports and how that trend progresses. But I would like to see obviously that number come down and get kids back at school where they actually do belong.
If I can just come back on that, I think it's really hard because we've got an increase in numbers of elective home education, but we've also come through a period where we went into children receiving home education, and I think it's a bit difficult, isn't it, to sort of like see them both being the same, where we have that robust conversation with parents to make the decision around elective home education. Then we get parents actually making the choice, we would hope, in the best and informed way. And in the response back to the safeguarding side of things, where we have parents who are known to other officers, then we do follow up with the other agencies that are involved to make sure we've got robust processes in place to follow up on safeguarding.
Mrs. Taylor.
I think that was one of our main concerns when we first went into lockdown, all those hidden children that were generally seen in school that we were concerned about, and then they weren't. But we do rely on other partners like GPs, health visitors, things like that to see those children. But the campaign we ran at the beginning of the lockdown was relying on communities to tell us of children that they were worried about, and we were just in the process of rerunning that campaign again to make sure that, you know, we need people on the ground in communities and letting us know if they've got concerns about children, because they're not being seen in school, and that is one of our greatest concerns, is the safeguarding of children. So we are looking to rerun that campaign to make sure that communities are aware, and that if they've got any concerns that they ring them through the appropriate numbers.
Thank you very much. And I believe following the meeting last week of the health scrutiny, that for all councillors, and I hope we pass it on, we were given some numbers and communication that we can go through to pass on to all of our contacts, that people do have concerns, where they should go immediately. Obviously, if it's an urgent concern, it's police straight away. Anything that they're just concerned about, but it's not an emergency, we have all been given numbers which hopefully we will disperse through our contacts. So I would like to ask Ellie and also Jane, I think this inclusion in Leicestershire schools, I think over the coming months this could change, and I would like to see, and I think the committee would like to see, that something similar comes back to us, probably maybe even this time next year, if not before, when the new school year starts, and we see how the picture is changing or going in either way. So is that agreeable to the committee, that we get it back? And I'll leave it to Jane and the Cabinet lead member and support member as to when it's best time. I think we need to see the figures from the September intake personally. Is that agreed? Yes, thank you. Yeah, Mrs. Taylor.
Yeah, just to reassure the committee as well that I see these figures on a monthly basis as well. So I do have oversight of these figures, as do the senior leadership team as well.
Thank you very much. So we now move on to item 11, which is the final item on today's agenda, which is a report on unaccompanied asylum seeking children. And that is Jane. Or is Kelda joining us again as well, or just yourself, Jane? And thank you.
Thank you. Yes, we've set out a report for you here that outlines both our duties and our responsibilities around unaccompanied asylum-seeking children and the services that we deliver. So I'm going to hand over to Kelda Clare, who's the Head of Service for Children in Care and Care Leavers, who's going to take us through the report. Thank you.
Hello, thank you. So in terms of a level of background, the National Transfer Scheme was established in 2016 to provide a mechanism for the statutory responsibility for unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, which I would use as UASC throughout this report, to be transferred between an entry-level authority, an entry local authority to another local authority in the UK, due to the numbers that were arriving in certain local authorities and the need to ensure that these children had appropriate accommodation and homes, and that they weren't then being able to offer that at that initial place. So we identified that we would engage with that. On 14th of December 2021, the Home Office issued formal notice to then direct authorities to comply with the National Transfer Scheme. So this was a change in position, in that it had been a voluntary position prior to this, and now we were being directed to engage. And we were no longer identifying a specific number for the year. There's now a cycle of children coming through to Leicestershire. The exact numbers of the local authority won't be known at that time. So in our cycle, it will depend upon the number of children that require transfer. So it's very much demand led. We have average that we will be looking at around 4 on each entry level that we have as Leicestershire. So in terms of our local context, we have a UASC team specifically that sits within our Children in Care service, and we provide a service to two types of UASC children: those that are under the age of 18 who are looked after and are therefore children in care, and those who are 18 to 25 years of age who we could have a care leaver duty to. And currently the council has 38 children in care who are UASC and 75 UASC care leavers, and that was at December 2021, and a total of 113 children and young people open to the UASC team, and this will be due to assessments being undertaken as well, and over 21s who we're offering some support to. So as well as our numbers and the NTS levels, they come to us in a number of different ways. We have spontaneous arrivals, so those that arrive from their travel and present in Leicestershire, and we have a duty to assess their age and therefore accommodate if we identify that we consider them to be under the age of 18. And between April and the end of December 2021, the council accommodated 14 spontaneous new arrivals, which is an average of about 1.6 children arriving per month. I've described the National Transfer Scheme and the principles behind that. And in July 2021, Leicester joined the service, the voluntary NTS, and between in this financial year, so from April until December, we had received 9 transfers of young people through that scheme. The NTS became mandatory, as I've identified, and are likely to take 4 in each cycle, and the council therefore is expected to continue to accept children through the scheme and accommodate within 10 working days of the referral. We will know when we're in our cycle and when we will be expected to take those children. The other area in which we have now identified that children are arriving within Leicestershire and presenting as UASC young people is through the children arriving through the adult asylum system. So hotels that are identified within Leicestershire, where the Home Office have dispersed adults which they have identified as being into those areas, and then they've subsequently claimed as being children, and we then have a duty of care to ensure that we assess their age and we respond appropriately should they be considered to be under the age of 18. And within this forum, we have identified a number of young people, whereas initially they had been identified as adults. We are clearly accepting that they are under the age of 18 and therefore are required to have a service from us as a looked after young person, and therefore then they become available to becoming care leavers and the service that they're offered through that. So from October 2021, we have had 15 referrals from the dispersal hotels. 8 of these have been accommodated by Leicestershire as children in care. 3 have had full assessments which are underway. 3 have been assessed to be adults, and 1 was moved by the Home Office to another hotel in a different local authority. So you can see there that from the 15, the majority we are identifying as being children. I haven't had the outcomes of the 3 of the assessments that are underway, but principally we are seeing that there are missed age assessed children within these hotels, which then enables us to have to take the responsibility, quite rightly, to ensure that they have the right accommodation and the right support as looked after children. If we continue to receive an average of about 5 referrals per month, as we have done in October to December, this would be an average of 3.6 children accommodated per month, which is a significant number and far outreaches the spontaneous arrivals and the planned NTS arrivals that we've been managing prior to the hotel dispersal units being set up. So in terms of children who are looked after by our US service, they receive a specialist service, and this ranges from their age assessments, which is an incredibly specialist undertaking and an assessment which incorporates their journey, their understanding, and considers all areas to make sure that we are applying all the principles required by law. We have to allocate a social worker and a personal advisor. We have accommodation specialist support within the asylum process and appropriate interpreter support. And we also have specialist support from our virtual school for all of our children once they are identified as being looked after and subsequently when they are care leavers. So I think that gives you a brief overview of the rapid increase of children who are being identified as unaccompanied asylum-seeking children, and therefore the responsibilities that are aligned with us as Leicestershire to ensure that they are receiving the right support and accommodation. And it will clearly then be a greater resource requirement to meet their need. This is a combination of current Home Office funding, which we receive for all US young people. There's a higher funding requirement for those that come through NTS than those that arrive as a spontaneous arrivals or those through the hotel. And we also have Leicestershire County Council's revenue budget contribution, which is currently absorbing the demands and funding shortfalls. So we are looking at the demand cost in the short to medium term and the need for growth and how that is then going to be covered by the Home Office, covering that cost implication of the increasing numbers that are coming through both NTS, spontaneous arrivals, and those through the hotels. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Do I have any comments or questions? Mr. Walsh.
I'm sorry, Kelda, I struggled to understand one of the issues.
Okay.
At one point we talk about 1.6 children arriving per month, and then in another place we're looking at 5.29. Can you just walk me through the difference in those two figures?
I think the 5.29 is a combination of both the NTS and the hotel numbers coming through, potentially.
Just help me again. What do you mean by hotel numbers?
Okay, so we have our national transfer scheme where we're in the cycle. So we will be getting on average about 4 young people. It's demand led, so that could increase, could decrease against that. But we're assuming an average that will come through our national transfer scheme. The hotels is the dispersal hotels, which the Home Office have set up within Leicestershire, where they have been housing young people that they have identified as being adults in their first age assessment. So they're placed in the Home Office dispersal hotel. However, they then claim that they are under 18. And what we have identified is that upon doing age assessments, and not even full age assessments, quite often it's an initial age assessment, we are quite clear with our specialist team that they are actually under 18. So we have quite a high number that are coming through that direction of travel rather than just being a spontaneous arrival. So they've been placed within Leicestershire as an adult, but they're actually then identified as being a child.
Thanks, Coda.
Right, anybody else? No? Right, well, we're coming to the end of the meeting and I'd like to thank you all for attending. I'd like to just point out that the next meeting is to take place on the 8th of March. So hopefully back here in LCC headquarters, and there's no other items that have been asked to take as urgent. So thank you very much indeed, and safe journey home. Thank you.